In a contemporary culture where we are increasingly isolated and divided from our fellow humans, many people have been led astray from a healthy path of growth and inspiration, and fallen into painful symptoms of depression, loneliness, and disillusionment.
There is a growing void of community where we can have honest conversations about complex topics. We need to create spaces for the free thinkers, the outliers, and those seeking to further the ideals of the Enlightenment.
As two eccentric artists with first-hand experience of surviving mental and social traumas, we share an unrelenting passion for understanding the human condition and continuing the process of navigating it today. This is why I, Laura Becker, an artist and writer from the United States,
and me, Vincent, psychology graduate, have come together across continents, generations, cultures, and life experiences to have these nuanced conversations.
We hope you will join us on this journey across the mind on TransPsyche.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 2 of the TransPsyche podcast. And you're with me, Vincent from South Africa.
And me, Laura from the United States of America.
So today we want to talk about a recent letter that Laura posted on her Twitter feed, which got a lot of attention around her detransitioning and her experience with the surgeons. So, Laura, do you want to tell us what exactly happened there?
Right. So, I've been thinking for a while, I want to contact my surgeon, the surgeon who performed the top surgery and mastectomy when I was 20, because I wanted to inform him that I've detransitioned to, one, show him / just the public in general that, detransition does happen and transition regret it is a thing, and it's a very real thing, and it's an increasingly common thing, and just inform him specifically, like, hey, you're like former patient, I'm your former patient, and, I was 20 when you removed my breasts, and I was very mentally ill at the time, and I don't think that this was a good decision. I don't think I should have been allowed to do this, and just, basically, it was, it was better written than that. But like, I was just saying, like, just, consider that, your ethical duty to do no harm. First, do no harm. And, it is harmful if there's not enough gatekeeping procedures. And the letters that I received, because he was trying to operate under the WPATH standards of care, which require 2 letters from, mental health professionals. But I basically told him those letters that I received were not properly gatekeeped. You were trying to do the right thing by asking for those 2 letters, but the 2 letters came from people that weren't gatekeeping me. They were not adequate assessments of my mental health. I mean, my psychiatrist wrote in the letter to him that I seemed mentally stable. And a few weeks after she wrote that, I was in the hospital again for suicidal ideation. And very, very unstable. And so I don't know why she didn't do a proper assessment. And the other letter I got was from my general practitioner, who didn't hardly know me at all and was not treating me whatsoever for mental health. I mean, I just saw her like once a year. And she was like, sure, I'll write you this letter. I don't think she asked any questions about it. She just wrote it. So, if he was trying to cover himself, by saying, yeah, I followed the WPATH standards of care, like the standards of care were not followed. And in addition to that, I don't think you should be operating on young girls anyway, even if the WPATH standards of care were technically followed. Yeah. Because, and on his website, I saw that he works with minors. So I believe girls as young as 16 are having their breasts removed because they want to be men. I don't think that this is acceptable at all for anyone under at least 21. I was 20 at the time, at least 21, if not 25, because the brain isn't even developed until 25. So I basically wrote him that, and I said, check out, I put in a couple links, to show, like, I think I put in Lisa Littman's study, the detransition study, to show like 60% of the people in the detransition study, transition due to trauma and mental health related reasons. And 25% were gay. So it's really dangerous territory to be doing this. So that's what I wrote in the letter. And my intention of the letter was to be, polite and rational and calm, but also, honest and bold and, just very forthright about it. And I think that's how it came off. So I posted the letter on Twitter to show my followers, who are mostly people concerned with gender issues, parents or, other people concerned with gender critical stuff. And it got a very overwhelmingly positive reception. A lot of people retweeted it. A lot of people quote tweeted it and added their own thing, like, this is really important. But then it started getting a lot of negative feedback as well. And the negative feedback, there was two different sort of main points. One point was basically, well, you made your decision. You have to take personal responsibility. I'm not sure why you're blaming someone for why are you blaming the doctor? Like, this was your choice. This is what you wanted. And it's your own problem that you have to live with. And I don't know why you're, blaming others for your own mistakes. Basically, personal accountability type thing, but in a really kind of cruelly said way. The other one was basically, well, your experience doesn't speak for all trans people, and you are making it so much harder for trans people to access the proper life-saving care that they need. And just because it didn't work out for you doesn't mean it won't work out for other people. And now it's going to be so much harder. And like, basically, why are you like taking out your frustrations on trans people? And then there was a couple weird ones. We can maybe get into those, but Vincent, that's kind of the main two ones. Yeah.
The you don't speak for other trans people, because I saw some of these comments. The thing is, I didn't see any specifics of how you are making it harder. I suppose they think that if you shut down that surgeon, that'll be one less surgeon doing double mastectomies on demand.
Right.
Is that their logic? I mean, because the ones I saw, they didn't actually give a coherent explanation for why they think you're going to affect the treatment of genuine gender dysphoric people.
Right. And because another theme that was a lot in the second one was like, well, why are you seeking legal action? You don't have a legal case. And it was very much about the law and legality of it. And I said, like, well, I think I've been pretty clear that this has no legal intention. I'm not seeking legal repercussion. Although a lot of people did tell me, like, you should sue. A lot of people told me that. And I said, like, I'm not currently pursuing that. And so their arguments were very weak. They were basically very, broadly projecting, like, this is just an example of, you are an example of a transphobic person or, someone who is just making it harder. Like, there should be no gatekeeping. In my opinion, it was very selfish, their remarks, because, they couldn't possibly take the perspective of someone who had a really kind of traumatic medical experience when they were like suicidal and like 20 years old, and they are informing their surgeon that it didn't work out and maybe he should consider, his practices or like reconsider the process. So to protect other people from going through the same thing. But they took that, in my opinion, very genuine act of kind of goodwill and advocacy for other young girls, basically mentally ill girls, like me, and twisted it around to say that I was selfish. But in reality, they were being the selfish ones for just having no empathy at all. And then, of course, the ones that literally said, like, well, fuck you, basically, you just have to, and some of them were quite cruel. I mean, it is Twitter. So, but those were probably some of the cruelest comments that I've ever gotten. And this is the most backlash that I've ever received so far. Stay tuned. But, there might be more. A sequel probably will. A whole universe of that, or a cinematic. What do you call that? The universe, the Funk God universe. Some of them were like, you kind of ruined yourself, or like you deserved it, or like this is what you get for being mentally ill, or this is what you get for being a tranny, or this is what you kind of get for being stupid, basically, like just saying like, well, you were stupid and, you made a dumb mistake. Everyone makes stupid and dumb mistakes. So why are you special and why do you get to complain about it? And just things that are just like, seems like you maybe have some kind of bitterness about something you've made in your life. Like what like well-adjusted person, even if you don't agree with what they're saying, who goes around saying like, your medical trauma was, just fuck you for that. Like you deserved it. Like it's not normal.
I saw your one comment, which I'm not going to bring up all your comments on the thread, but the one where you said you sound like a detransition phobic.
Oh yeah, someone was like, you are so clearly a trans. Well, one person said like your letter was great. It was fine up until the end when it got really transphobic. And I said, what was transphobic about it? Because there was nothing, it was at the end, I was basically saying like, I think you should reconsider like operating, doing cosmetic surgery or these procedures on young girls, many of whom are unstable. And so that was apparently transphobic. And so I was like, well, what is an example? And they were like, oh, well, just, I didn't even have to give an example. It's just so clear, from reading it. And I said, well, and they're like, you're just transphobic. And I said, well, it seems like you're a little detransphobic.
So I want to point something out here that I've been holding my tongue on since you posted that letter. And that's why I specifically wanted to ask you, what are the actual arguments? Because I've actually got the letter on the screen now.
Okay.
And I just went through it again just to make sure that I'm not, being biased here. But there's nothing transphobic in it. It's totally realistic. It's from an empirical perspective, which that means is that you're speaking from a experiential perspective, and you're reminding someone of their entire profession's ethical duty to do no harm, which should be a universal understanding that people should avoid. And then the thing that comes out in these kinds of threads, which to someone like me is just absolutely fascinating. Like I actually want to start documenting such an example of where you can see where ideology replaces rationality, and I know other people are talking about this a lot recently. Steven Pinker seems to have a knack for producing books at the right time about the right topic. And he's done this book called Rationality, which I haven't actually read yet, but I've read all his other books. So I'm confident that he's got it right. But it's the point that I'm making is that there's no, what they do when someone reverts to name calling without specific arguments, that's a sign of ideology. It's a sign that they're captured by the cognitive dissonance, the literal pain of having to consider someone else's perspective which conflicts with their own. And what happened in that thread was exactly that, where there were all these people that I suppose your followers were the first people to support you and respond. And then, of course, they reshare, and that's when you start getting the trolls and the outliers. And that's when they start, depending on the time of day and whatever. I've noticed that sometimes people post things at midnight USA time, and it's only by the next day that there's responses and backlash. So it's got a lot to do with who's awake at the time.
True. I mean, I don't know, because I do post. I post around the clock.
But what amazes me is they've got all that time. You see my point? They've got all that time to come up with an actual argument. Link, even if it's a newspaper article. I prefer a proper study or some kind of research. Like you mentioned, as soon as you started talking, you mentioned Lisa Littman's study, which I know a lot of people don't like and they don't want to agree with it. But she's followed all the proper methodology of doing these studies. Same with the stuff that James Cantor does as well. I don't agree with everything James Cantor says, but he does everything properly. Mm-hmm. So if you don't like the findings, then you should either make a convincing argument or go and do the research yourself.
Right. Don't shoot the messenger, right?
Exactly. And what I find so amazing is it's just incredible how the people that have this empirical lived experience, all right, like you, from having I mean, we don't have to go into it completely, but just because you said you were 20 when you started.
Yes.
Was it earlier?
Well, 20 when I
20.
medically transitioned.
So it's just amazing how they just assume that at 20 you knew what you were doing. You must take responsibility for your life. Okay, but they're not interested, because they are interested in lots of other categories of people's comorbidities and psychopathology. All right, because they use that very often to defend their behavior.
Right, exactly.
But when it comes to someone who's reversed her behavior because she's had an epiphany that she made a massive mistake, and I'm only quoting you there, just so
yes,
everyone knows. And just for context, like, I think if you listen to our first episode as well, the idea of our podcast is to, like I was saying earlier, to try and work through these things. Not a matter of, we're not here to sort of necessarily prevent people doing stuff, but it's certainly to raise awareness and like show people how, between your struggles and my struggles that I've had in my own life, how people can get through these things by talking and by thinking about it openly.
Right.
This is why it's so important to have an open discussion platform like a podcast. So sorry, do you want to say some more about the letter? Because I think there's a couple of other things that sort of run there.
Well,
just the theme of like reminding someone to do no harm is just, to me, it's amazing that that's even necessary.
Well, like I wasn't trying to be. I mean, yeah, I was a little poetic. I'm always a little poetic, even when I'm being my most rational.
You have to be.
I am incapable if not. But I wasn't trying to be dramatic or, over the top. When I was saying, like, first, remember, like, do no harm. I was kind of just saying, like, listen, whether you knew it or not, and I don't know. I mean, a lot of people do make judgments on these doctors. Some fervently believe that they really don't care. They're just out to make money. I do agree that that's happening. I don't know this person. It's very likely that that's part of it, but it's also likely that he thinks of himself as a good guy who is trying to do a, humanitarian cause as well. And maybe he doesn't question, he just conveniently doesn't question the other risks, because he thinks he's doing well and maybe he hasn't heard about detransition. So it's a good faith argument on my part, because I never once said you are causing harm. I never said, like, you have harmed me. It wasn't anything like that. It wasn't accusatory. It was very much just saying, like, I have been harmed by this inadvertently, and I think you should consider the other risks that are associated with this. And it's more complicated than perhaps either of us thought, or perhaps the popular discourse thinks right now that you might be following. And, man, just the vitriol to something so, straightforward, which is just like, hey, FYI, like, this didn't work out. Maybe just think about it a little more. Can
I just, for the listeners, remind everyone what we're talking about here? And I'm sorry to do this, Laura, to rub it in. You had a double mastectomy, and I know I'm just going to remind you of something that I don't know if we recorded, but something that you said once before, that you realized that what you really wanted to do, you were in such a state during this transitioning process, that what you were really trying to do was to, and I'll quote you just so that I don't put words in your mouth, you were really trying to stab yourself in the heart.
No, that's not the correct quote. It's similar. The quote was I really just wanted to remove my broken heart.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Because my breaths were suspiciously close to my heart, weren't they?
To your heart, yeah.
Yeah, literally. I mean, again, it's not being dramatic. It's literally.
I mean, and this is why I want to remind everyone what we're talking about here. You had your God-given body part removed.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get too psychoanalytic or Jungian here, but
no, that's all right. It's better be Jungian. It's
yeah. Because the idea of and okay, so let me just explain to everyone that there's a little bit of history with myself. It's totally different, but it is in some ways similar, where I spent 7 years orthorexic and basically anorexic when I was younger, and I was trying to waste away the parts of myself that I didn't like.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something that Laura and I connect on. And it's one of the reasons we have this podcast at all, is that you've got a 48-year-old man in South Africa and a 24-year-old female in America who have struggled with the same sort of core issues, but from totally different generations, totally different what they thought were solutions. And that's what's so important to remember here is like you have these struggles at different stages of life, but for both of us, it was around that adolescent phase. Okay, and my resource at the time was to kind of starve myself and become this obsessive. Your solution was to transition and to have a double mastectomy, and anyone who's been through this in any form knows that it was a matter of time until you internally developed the structures to get through it. And instead, there were people on the outside who effectively weaponized your crisis to, whether it's make money from you or to support their own ideas. I just want people to understand that I think there's a lot more going on here than just the letter that you wrote. It's the doctor breaking his ethical boundaries and people using this for their own ideas.
Mm-hmm. And now, again, not just him. I mean, I did get a few people saying like, well, why are you blaming the surgeon? Again, I did not blame him. I just informed him. The letter was literally titled, what was it titled, Vincent? You have it pulled up. It was titled Notification of Detransition. Notification, right? That's very, very, straightforward. It wasn't like accusation, right? It was notification. So, but there are some people that are saying, well, why blame him? Like, why not blame, your other doctors, or why not blame, yourself, or, the media or whatever, And I said, like, first of all, like I said, I'm not blaming him. There's many people who I feel failed me, including myself. And unfortunately, the psychiatrist the main person that actually diagnosed me with gender dysphoria, which that process involved me seeing her one time and being like, I think I'm trans and I have gender dysphoria. And she was like, okay, I'll look it up. And then the next time she was like, yeah, I think you meet the diagnosis for gender dysphoria. So I will give you that label.
Right. She had to look it up.
Yes. She knew a little bit about it, but she had to look it up basically. And she was like,
all right, she was being careful.
She thought she was being careful, but the problem is deeper than even that. It's the problem that the definition of gender dysphoria, the criteria is bullshit. The criteria for gender dysphoria could basically just be autism or trauma or just being quirky or a lesbian or gay man. It's just a lot of stereotypes. And I did meet all the criteria for gender dysphoria, but she never did more evaluation than that. It'd be like if I came in and said, I think I have borderline personality disorder, because I did also meet a lot of criteria for that too. And if she was like, sure, yeah, I think you meet it. Like, it doesn't matter what the condition is. Like, if you meet someone one or two times and then you give them a diagnosis, that's not good practice as well. Like, you're giving them a diagnosis and then writing them a surgery letter. I hadn't even started testosterone yet when I got that letter, I believe, or I'd only been on like a month, because
oh my God.
Yeah, I started this all like right at the same time. So, it's bad enough that I started testosterone when I just turned 20. So that would have been in January of 2017. And I had the surgery 7 months later in August of 2017.
Oh, wow. Okay. I didn't realize it was so shortly after you even started the process.
Yeah, I had been debating about being trans. I did identify as trans, but mostly just socially. And I grappled with what I should do for about 2 years before I finally was just like, you know what, I guess I'll just transition. And when I said that, and definitely a very reckless and desperate suicidal mindset, they just said, sure, here you go. And, there was no thought. Again, there was no thought on her part, the GP's part, or the surgeon's part. And on my part, my thought was completely irrational. So I'm not sure why people make the argument that, well, why didn't you think? It's just like, you think I wasn't thinking about this? I was ruminating about it for like 5 years. I was thinking about this. It's just that my thoughts were disturbed. I was mentally ill and suicidal. So, it definitely was very rushed. And that's part of the, the standards of care, the WPATH standards of care. I don't know the exact quote, but you're not supposed to rush the process. You're supposed to take some time, living in the opposite sex role and all these different things that they suggest. Yeah. And additionally, I should say that the WPATH standards of care are just guidelines. All right. It's not like they are considered the top guidelines because they were like the first ones to do it, because they originally were the Henry Benjamin standards of care. So they were just the first standards of care. It just doesn't mean that there's not alternative models or modalities of standards of care. They have just authority because there weren't that many trans people originally, and they were the first ones to do it. And then it's risen to this level where suddenly they're respected as the be all and end all. But the WPATH, members will even say that they don't have all the answers, and they'll even say that their standards of care were meant for adults. They were not meant for adolescents, and they've had to kind of navigate the big rush of adolescents transitioning. Exactly. So it's not like, so again, like all the surgeons protect themselves by saying they're using the standards of care. Again, they're not really using it though. And even if they were, the standards of care are not that great, because the definition of gender dysphoria is based in stereotypes. It can apply to a ton of different stuff.
Well, I must add at this point that when I started my training 4 years ago, so I've got a degree in psychology. The training said that the AFIRM protocols are the standard of care. Okay, and as an adult, a mature adult in this class, I didn't know much about this, but I was like, just logically, that doesn't make sense to me. If unfortunately, there's no good metaphor for this, such a serious thing. But if you just walk into a doctor's office and say, you know what, I think I've got toothache. Can you just pull out the back row of my teeth, all of them? The doctor doesn't just automatically do it. He does an X-ray and he checks all sorts of things, and he finds out you've got an abscess actually in your gum line, and no teeth need to be pulled out. Like I said, there's no good metaphor for this. So sorry. Well,
you know what the good metaphor is? Your story, like the story of your eating disorder, right? Like the difference between our stories is that we had a similar bodily issue that was self-destructive, but you were managed to struggle through it and survive it and come out of it on your own to be perfectly physically healthy. Even though you're old now, sorry. But I don't think of you as that old, but I'm just poking fun. But but I was, at the same sort of stage of crisis, or really even earlier, because you came out of it, when you're like 26 or 27?
Yeah.
And I was still like in the beginning.
23, 24.
Okay.
So it was 7 years. So there's an interesting observation there that these adolescent identity crises, I think, do take years to resolve. Sorry, carry on.
Well, I was just So the difference is that you didn't go to a doctor and say like, I really think that. I really think that I'm overweight, and I really think that, I need to be thinner, and, and then you would, tell the doctor, I'm like, doing, I'm an alcoholic, or I'm doing drugs, or, I have depression, anxiety, I have this history of, childhood trauma and abuse. And, I this is what I'm eating, and blah, blah, blah. And then the doctor's like, oh, yeah, that really sounds really bad. We better make sure that you lose that weight right away. And we better get you
weight.
Right. You need to lose more weight. That's exactly what happened when I went in and said like, yeah, I'm suicidal, I have autism, I'm doing this and this and that. And instead, you know, the informed consent clinic, when I got the testosterone, the surgeon and the psychiatrist were all like, yeah, that seems all right. Well, sure, let's do this because you seem mentally stable, which is just just bizarre to me.
Let's just talk about that for a second. The informed consent. Okay, did they tell you all the side effects of testosterone? They
said, you know, the very limited and very standard, like, you will, you know, your voice will deepen. And, you know, they definitely didn't go into all, you know, because they hadn't even studied it. And I'm still learning things about testosterone, but not from them. I'm learning about it from, you know, detrans people or trans people who spoke about what it did to their bodies. Like, you know, so yeah, I'm sure they did give me a packet of information, but it was very, you know, shallow.
It just amazes me, you know, because we get ethics drummed into us. You can't do this and you can't do that and you can't do all these things. All these things you can't do. Point that you start wondering, well, I'm afraid to even mention Freud or Jung because somebody might get offended and run screaming out the office. You know?
Wow.
But it amazes me that I mean, just look at what we're saying. That, you know, the one side of the ideology that's going around, the one side says we must listen to people's lived experiences. Okay? So the whole lived experiences thing, it's funny because I've actually used lived experience in my own writing, but I'm very specific about my lived experience with orthorexia or with growing up in apartheid or whatever other topics. I will use that phrase, lived experience, but I'm very specific about what I'm talking about. And then I will go on to what we do know, because, you know, there's an experience. My lived experience of orthorexia was I got a lot of attention. It was quite creepy how many people, girls and boys, are drawn to very thin people. And people that have got such conviction about their diet, it was very captivating. People, if I had to meet people over for dinner, they would listen to me for 2 hours talking about how I created this meal, because I'm a chef as well. And it was quite good for my ego, of course, you know, because there's the evidence. Look, I'm so thin, you know, and of course, you know, a lot of women are envious of any thin body, but when they meet a thin man, it's like, I don't know, there's something else that gets triggered. I don't know what it is. But what I'm saying is, it's amazing how we validate the lived experience. But then when someone like you comes up and says, I've had surgery, I've taken years of, or was it months of testosterone?
Just 7 months.
7 months of testosterone, major surgery, and a major mental health crisis that I'm still navigating at the age of 24. And everyone's like, oh, shut up. You know,
it doesn't fit their narrative.
I just, and this is the thing, is that that's what I, as and I think this is where it helps being South African, because I'm very much coming at it from an outsider's perspective, where it's so distinct to me that there's this ideology at play versus people's actual lived experiences. And, okay, I suppose what's more important here is what you're actually saying, which is, I had a mental health crisis, and no one's listening to you. You know, no one's interested in that. All they're interested in is that you're speaking out against the trans community. You're not at all.
Right. I'm advocating for people who identify as trans, because like I said in the letter, it's not just me. I know I pointed to several links, several studies, and, you know, like, you know, just saying like the number of detransitioners is, you know, on the rise. And, you know, that's not me just saying my lived experience. That's also like empirical data.
Exactly.
But it doesn't fit their narrative. And like, I myself am aware, you know, of my own lived experience, because I do think to myself, I mean, I have a pretty solid foundation, I think, for, you know, many of the things I'm saying I think are quite reasonable. Like, we should not allow at least people under 21 to transition. I don't think that that's unreasonable at all by any means. But then there is the fact that there's people who have lived experience that's different from mine, right? And that's what I consider too. I consider the fact that there are trans people who are older in life, they've successfully transitioned, and they seem happy and stable, men and women. And that, some would argue would, conflict with my quote unquote narrative or ideology. But the difference is that I'm very curious why they are, that worked out for them. I'm very curious what the difference was. And so were they. Like the reasonable trans people on Twitter are saying the same things that people like me are saying. They are saying like, no, this is not the same experience that I had, and this would not work out for someone who's that young and that unstable. Like the reasonable trans people are saying the same things that I'm saying. And so again, lived experience isn't everything, but if there's a really common experience that's happening and it's increasing more and more and more, we should just ignore that because it might, quote unquote, prevent life. Someone might kill themselves. It's just like, well, guess what? Like, what if I killed myself? Like, what is that? What, that doesn't matter at all. Like, I easily could have
around. If you did, you wouldn't be around to write these transphobic letters.
Right, exactly. See, they don't want
to be a relief.
Right. So they don't actually care about dysphoric people. They don't care about trans people. They only care about their own selfish, insecure ego needs. And now I want to point out just one of the weirdest things from one of the responses was not weird, but just very, it pissed me off, but it was also hilariously irrational. So, I got into a discussion with, I believe it was a non-binary person. So it was a woman who was non-binary, maybe trans. And she was, arguing that I don't know, she was making some point about mastectomy. And I said, I don't think we should remove the healthy breasts of minors or people under the age of 25, like as a rule. And she basically said, you're being so creepy. Like, it's just so creepy and weird that you're even discussing this. You are using, she was like, you're using language, like basically it's sexual harassment. It is sexual harassment to use the term healthy breasts. What am I, some sort of cattle? I'm not your breeding cow. I'm not your milkmaid, and all you see is breasts. And I retweeted it and I said, this is internalized misogyny at play because like you're so insecure about your own womanhood that you are getting upset about another woman using the term healthy breasts to describe, just physical body parts, anatomical body parts that were removed due to mastectomy. Like, what do you think a mastectomy is? It's removal of it's a removal of breasts. And in this case, they were healthy organs. But this person really was adamant that this was like creepy and sexual. And then another person chimed in and was like, it's basically sexual harassment if you keep referring to secondary sex characteristics if someone has told you that that makes them uncomfortable. And I said, I'm not going to be gaslit into thinking that. First of all, this person came onto my post talking about this subject, so they knew what they were getting into. If it actually triggered them, they would not engage with this material. And so that's absolute bullshit. Also, it's bullshit to say that that's sexual harassment. Like that, come on. Like, and that was just really. It's like, and that's when I quickly, maybe a few hours later, I muted the whole thing after that. I didn't want to because I was getting a lot of positive feedback and some interesting dialogue, but I muted the whole thing because I'm just like, I can't, it is a waste of time to try to rationally engage with people this unhinged, and unstable.
Well, I think let's be honest about, as much as you and I are both quite active on Twitter, the analogy I used was, it's like standing in a park, screaming your opinions day and all night. The problem is, it's not just a park. It's not like a public park. When you go down to the public park, the chances are a lot of the people in the park are your neighbors, and a lot of them are quite civilized. This is more like standing in the high street where all the big nightclubs are at 3 a.m. and screaming your opinion. Actually, Twitter's a lot more like that, where the chances are you're going to upset someone. I mean, I had an evening out the other night with my cohort, and we all had a few drinks. And by the end of the evening, one of the girls who you and I get along very well, just a perfect example. I said something which was a one-line quip, which should have been seen in context, because she didn't hear everything else I said. she got quite offended by it. And then when I tried to correct myself, I accidentally waved my finger at her. Now, keep in mind, I've known this girl for 4 years. It's not like we don't know each other, you know. Got more upset. Anyway, we resolved it. But that was an example of what I'm talking about. Is Twitter's like being out at a nightclub at 3 in with varying degrees of drunk people.
Yeah, and everything's taken out of context.
Everything. So, so I want to, if you don't mind, I want to just analyze this this last comment post.
Yeah,
that you said.
It's very psychologically interesting.
This is just precious material. That, you know, okay, I'm gonna start off this by reading something that I just happened to post the other day, and it's by it's quoted from an article that I read on Foucault, right? Now, Foucault is a controversial figure, Michel Foucault. He's one of the postmodernists. He's got all sorts of historical deviant behavior that we could go into. But just to give you an idea of where I think that post is coming from, I quote, "Those planning suicide," he mused, this is someone writing about Foucault's book, "could look for partners without names, for occasions to die liberated from every identity." So just to be clear, that what he's saying there, and this is stuff that was written, he might have written that in the 60s or 70s, died in the 80s. Again, I'm tying this back to ideology, that the ideology is that your identity is central to regardless of your physical manifestation. So this woman that's this non-binary that's assuming that you're categorizing her as like a breeding stock is I would say, you know, you said it's internalized misogyny
and projection of her own insecurities.
I would actually go you know, obviously I'm not supposed to be diagnosing people on Twitter, but as a group, those people are actually suffering from what Michel Foucault did in that quote there. When you release yourself from any bonds to the community, to the people around you, and you've considered and maybe even attempted suicide. Michel Foucault attempted suicide, I believe, a couple of times. I can't remember now. But you're talking about. So I've also attempted suicide. I've come back from that when I was much younger. I was 13 when I did that. And I understand this thinking that you make a choice when you decide to live, when you decide to stick around. You make a choice, okay, I'm going to live. Or you make the choice, okay, I'm just going to use this world for all my personal gratification because that's all that matters in the end. And, you know, in comes this, to this is the nihilistic atheist who believes it's just one life and you've got to burn it at both ends, baby. And that's it, you know.
Yeah.
Michel Foucault, I mean, I don't want to go into too much detail, but anyone can look up, well, certainly the article that I attached to that post was very, very good, and ties with all the stuff that I've read. I've read Michel Foucault himself, so
we can link that in the description.
Yeah, that'd be great. Because you need to understand what the non-binary that responded to you is manifesting all those ideas of essentializing their internal identity and this nihilistic view of what the purpose of our lives is and what your purpose is on this planet, you know. So for them to get offended by you suggesting that breasts have a function shows this complete rejection of, and it you know, I'll admit that there's a certain element of let's say the individuals striving towards their own goals, which is important in this conversation. Okay, so in psychology as well, we accept that people are striving towards their own goals. But when you unhinge yourself from the greater good of the community, or at very least the immediate people around you, you've effectively become a rogue agent, and you become the nihilist that was demonstrated by Michel Foucault's life, that he bragged about, my phrase, but burning life at both ends, meaning that you're doing so much destructive behavior that you corner yourself and there's nowhere left to go.
Mm-hmm.
So like you said, I just want to pick out that phrase because I've heard it a lot, this internalized misogyny. And I'm going to propose that it's actually like a remnant of suicidal or suicide ideation, that whether or not they've attempted suicide or not, for me, it's on a similar continuum of being a consumer of life rather than a
producer.
A producer, exactly, or a collaborator, a part of your community. And when I say community, I mean your community could literally be 3 people. As soon as you situate yourself into this dynamic of 3 or 4 people, or ideally, obviously,
or 3 or 4 rats.
Actually, any living being. That's actually a very good point, because why is it we always talk about the elderly getting pets? The same thing.
Mm-hmm.
This is how you are hardwired to function and to achieve any kind of I'll bring it back to good mental health and well-being. The only way you achieve this is by understanding what I'm talking about, the sense of community, the sense of living for others, even if it's a rat. Really. I spent like a year trying to convince my very elderly father to get a dog. And when he said he didn't want to, it was because he didn't want to leave the dog alone when he died. I mean, so because he said no to that, it actually forced me to visit him more often. So there's all these knock-on effects when you accept your role and the importance of having those other connections, But do you get what I mean? Like the internalized misogyny.
I mean, it's internalized. I think it is partially internalized misogyny, but what is misogyny? It's hatred of woman. But if you are a woman, it means you hate yourself too.
Yes.
So it's very much, it is internalized misogyny in general as a cultural thing. It seemed very pornographic, what she was saying to me, because I told her this. I said, like, you're the only one in this conversation using this language. Like, I never brought up that language at all. And in fact, it sounds like porn language. I've seen that, pornographic language, I'm not going to get into it, but like, if anyone knows about hue cows or like, milking fetish, just there's a lot of that sort of thing, breeding cows. If your mind is jumping to that, what does that say about what you, think of women or what you think of yourself? And I want to also bring up one of the other really concerning comments, was another young, FTM. I don't know how young they were, but they seemed very immature because they were saying, they were arguing like, well, who needs breasts?
FTM is female
to male. Hopefully, if anyone listening to this knows what that is, there's all the other stuff we're talking about. But yes, a female to male.
A lot of people don't.
Yeah. So talking about detransition, that's a whole other thing. But so this person was a young woman who is identifying as a man. And she was talking about how she wants to have top surgery. And I think she was angry because by me saying, like, what if maybe you didn't perform top surgery in some cases to this surgeon, or even any cases, depending, she was basically like, what if I can't get my surgery? Or, but she was saying, like, you know what? Like, why do I need breasts? Like, I literally don't need them. Like, there's just something external that I don't even use them. I don't even need them. And in fact, getting rid of them might actually be helpful to me. It prevents breast cancer. And then someone else, said like, so you would just get rid of, say your appendix just because you just weren't using it right now. And the person was like, I mean, yeah, you can just get rid of any body part that you're not using. Like it just was really disturbing because it's like this person almost views their body as just like a customizable avatar that doesn't have like real world context. Yeah. And then someone was like, what do you think breasts actually do? Like, what do you think the function of them is? And, it seemed like she just had no concept of it, probably because she was pretty young. And, I didn't have a concept of like having children or things like that. Or, in my mind, I was like, well, breasts are, that's what they're for, or whatever. But like, it was detached. And this person seems so incredibly detached from their body that they were saying, like, I don't need breasts, like, I really don't need any body parts. I mean, I can just kind of do whatever I please with it, and it doesn't really matter because, you know, there might be illness or, you know, they seem to have a very nihilistic and hopeless view of things. But they would probably say that they feel totally fine. You know, they would be in denial. It seemed that's what it sounded like.
So I wonder if there's like a, because I'm just thinking about the other side of this. You know, you're saying this person was quite young. I wonder if we've just failed to, you know, has the internet taken up so much bandwidth in some of these people's lives that they haven't been exposed to the, you know, I mean, I don't want to give away my age here, but like,
well, it's in our show notes.
Well. It is, yeah.
It's in our description.
I'm an artist as well, and I've painted the human figure, female and male, with all its glory repeatedly. Okay, and I just can't tell you the primordial satisfaction of recreating the image of a male or a female. Whether or not they're perfect is not really the issue. So what I'm getting at, I suppose I'm being a little bit metaphysical here, but what I'm getting at is I think the understanding of your body is, and again, I'm speaking from someone who, you know, spent all those years trying to erase my physical appearance. It's just, I just think there's things that switch on your will to live and your will to strive towards, you know, well-being. And there's things that switch them on and switch them off. And when you start talking about, so I just imagine that person had no exposure to how wonderful the human body is, whatever shape it is. Because I'm just wondering what you think of this, that the mind is so consumed with all this, you know, the consumption on Instagram and Twitter or whatever it is, that there's just been no exposure to let's say the archetype of, you know, the female form and the male form, and just the form that you've been given, you know. And
right.
I'm not religious, so I'm not getting religious here, but as someone who's been through those different processes of walking away from suicide and then walking away from an eating disorder, I came to the conclusion that every single day your body's like just buzzing with activity to get you up in the morning. Your body's like working while you conveniently go to sleep. You know, we pop sleeping tablets and we go to sleep, and your body is like furiously at work.
Yeah.
Fixing things and building things and making more shit and literally and all sorts of other things, you know. And it just amazes me that we wake up in the morning and we go, fuck it, I don't need that.
Right, exactly.
You know? It just amazes me. So I just hope that there's a gap there, that person hasn't had the exposure, and that's why they think like that.
They either have not had the exposure, or they've had exposure that was, you know, embodied of trauma, right? That's kind of what I had.
It's a good point.
You know, it's just both, I'd say, because not only did I was not able to experience the use of my body that I wanted, right? Like intimacy and love and affection and sex and like positive, and even just exercise, right? Even just physically doing something with that energy, or, you know, so that was part of it. But also, you know, I did have like negative experiences, I suppose, with my body, and, you know, not nearly as negative as I think some people. Like, I didn't have any sexual trauma, but I did have a little bit of physical trauma. And you know, just, I mean, there's a physical trauma that happens when you neglect your body. Like when you're, you know, as overweight as I was, and you have acne, and all you can see is just how disgusting you are, you know, even though there's just these really little flaws. And if you look at like your entire ecosystem of your body, though, you're looking at like a couple, I don't know, you know, blemishes on a beautiful photograph. Like, you know, my acne, yeah, it looked bad. It was unhealthy. And my fat looked bad and it was unhealthy. But like, everything else about my body was working totally fine, and everything was going as it should. I could still talk and eat and, well, mostly that's what I just did, talk and eat and sleep. But, if you're not appreciating your body, that's why I will continue to say this, and to myself as well. This is also a reminder, Laura, listen up. But, embodied physical experience, like actual sensory experience, even if it's just burning a fucking stick of incense or a candle, use your sense of smell, use the olfactory sense, or looking at a beautiful piece of art, or just feeling the wind, or like I went into the woods this week. It was really, really, really good. It was just so good. And, I didn't listen to anything. Like I could have probably still had a good time, like putting on a podcast or what I usually do, to distract my busy brain, but I didn't. I was silent besides the noises of the woods. It was sunset. It was really gorgeous. And it was that sensory experience of like, I don't like sensory experience because I'm so sensitive, because it's just so stimulating. Like I don't like winter, partly because I don't like wearing all those clothes. I don't like having to put on a hat and gloves and like a heavy coat. That's part of why I don't like it, because it's too stimulating. But I did expose myself to the sun, and it was a bit chilly, and I put on a hat and gloves, and it was really, really beautiful. And I think we've lost a lot of that because we don't need to be exposed to the elements. And then our body gets used to being in this like basically sterile, ecosystem of our houses. And like, if we're spending all our time in this tiny little box, like, I purposely made my tiny little box like jungle themed for a fucking reason, right? Like I have trees and fake plants and green all around me for a reason. But it's nothing compared to the sensory, experience. So I think that's a huge problem. I mean, and again, I don't know what this person experienced, but if you're that detached from your body as if to cavalierly say like, oh, well, I really don't need it. Like they're not doing anything for me, so who even cares? It's like, it's just, they are doing something. And I'll say this, like, not to be depressing, but it's just the reality. And it is very tragic and sad is that, I just go about my time. Sometimes I don't notice certain parts of my body, right? Like I don't notice my feet all the time. I don't, and I don't notice like my chest all the time, but sometimes I do notice my chest. And when I do notice it, if I think about it, it does feel like there's something missing. Like it feels like there's something not there. It feels like part of me is gone. And I remember what it felt like to have something there. Like a part of me is gone. And it's very, it's a very sad experience. So to say that it's not doing anything, like, I'm not technically, and I never have like breastfed or used them, sexually as I might have wished or whatever, but like, they were still literally part of my body that I very much took for granted. And now I regret the fact that I didn't respect my own body and life force that actually exists, really, to give myself life and connection and literally like nurturing and nutrients to another life form, potentially, right? So to say that you don't need a certain part of your body is really, really nihilistic.
Yo, Laura, I'm like welling up here. That was just such a beautiful.
Well, thank you. That's just my intention. Is just.
I could have listened to that the rest of the day, quite frankly.
Oh, really?
I hope everyone else appreciated that. I'm kind of. I had some clever ideas while you were talking, but it's such that connection to what your body is not two different things. It's the same thing.
Exactly.
And your mind doesn't let you escape that, and I just, if we go back to what that person said, there's this feeling of like almost retaliation, which I as a recovering Catholic, I think I relate to this quite well. That Catholics have these rituals where you go and you get on your knees for 20 minutes and you ask forgiveness for your sins. These rituals of yes, actually you can be angry at God. You can there's like permission to do that. It's built into the system, which I think is so helpful, because this is where it matters. That the expression of, I think it's quite natural to be frustrated. I mean, you pointed out my own struggle with these things, and I just, while you were talking, I just had a memory of doing something similar when I was in the middle of this orthorexic phase, going to a mountainous area here in South Africa and climbing up this quite a hectic trail. There was no one around. You know, if I'd slipped and fallen, I probably would have died there. And I got to the top of this mountain, and it overlooked these other hills. And I was just like, you know, the fact that my body provides this experience is just incredible, just miraculous, you know. But on the other hand, what I'm connecting here is that the reason I climbed that mountain was because I had this idea that I wanted to go to this place, climb to the top of the mountain where I knew nobody would hear me, and scream at God. So I used my body to get to this place, you know, and I did. I stood on this mountain and I screamed at God for all the shit that I'd been exposed to that had nothing to do with my own choices, you know. And you know that I think I was up there for a good while, an hour or two, and I sobbed for quite a while. I was just amazed that like there was no human in sight, you know, and I'm having this absolutely incredible experience. But the fact that I'd used my body to get to this hill was sort of impressed on me, you know, because it was a tough hill. It wasn't like a simple thing. Mm-hmm. So if I'd carried on with my orthorexia, I probably would have made it up that hill, quite frankly. But at this phase, I was starting to recover from it. But I just want to share this one little detail with you all, that after I'd sobbed a bit, and you know what they say about the tears clear your vision, you know, and I felt like the air in my lungs was like new air, and the light that I was seeing through my eyes was like suddenly clearer. And I looked down, and there was a piece of stone, like slate stone, that's quite easy to scratch on, lying at my feet. And I picked it up and I scratched the word reveal on this piece of stone. What I meant by that was we have to perform these rituals and these ceremonies, let's call them, which I just realized while you were talking, they involve accepting the anger at the universe or God or whatever it is, then dealing with it, you know, and then crying about it. And I'm talking about one specific little incident, but crying about it, but then taking the lesson from it, you know. I've still got that stone today, by the way. That's like 20 years later. I've still got that stone. And every time I find it in my cupboard, I get this little chill of, oh my God, from that day on, I went out of my way to reveal myself to myself.
Yes.
You know, warts and all. And that has been an amazing journey, you know. So
that's a very beautiful story.
Just to, because what you were saying was so similar. And the fact that you can go out there amongst all these things that are still happening in your life and just simply appreciate your body in the world, you know, it's just such a beautiful thing. And you know, every now and then the religions get it right because they actually ritualize these things for us.
Right.
So they take, you know, for example, in African culture, they take very young boys at 15 and they take them out into the wilderness and they send them on a very spiritual, I think it's a 3 or 4 day survival. They have to go out on their own in different directions and survive on their own. And I know this has actually been copied in a lot of boys' like camps in the West and in America, I believe, as well. But it's actually a traditional thing. And I think it exists in a lot of traditional cultures because they recognize the power of the boy being out there on his own and realizing that he's got nothing else to depend on but his own body and nature, you know, and the world around him. So, yeah, I just think we really hit on a lesson there, and the things that those comments are completely missing. You know, the really important elements that they're missing and they don't understand. And that's why I wanted to challenge that thing about the internalized misogyny, because I think it's correct, but it's the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, I completely agree. Which is why I know my thing that I always talk about and will continue to talk about is radical acceptance. And I wanted to mention also, like, it's very interesting how you utilized your anger to overcome what was upsetting you. You integrated it, right? You didn't run from it. You didn't turn it in on yourself. You went outwards. You didn't turn it in on another person. You didn't harm anybody, but you integrated your anger. And that's sort of what I did when I went to the woods this week. Was I went back to the place where a very hurtful individual traumatized me that last year on my birthday, and I hadn't been back since. And it's such a beautiful place. That's why I went there on my birthday to celebrate it.
Confronted.
Yeah. So I went here and I confronted it, and it was sad, and there was some, triggering sort of similar elements to last year, but it was a completely new experience. And it, I really felt an appreciation by, I went out of my way to say, you know what, I'm going to confront this. And not only am I going to confront it, but I'm going to have gratitude for it. And I ended up having, like, every time I go into the woods, I know, like, yeah, I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to get some pretty pictures. But every single time I do it, it's just so transcendent. It's like more transcendent every single time I do it. And this week, like, as soon as I got done, because it got cold, literally, I just left because it was like completely dark out by that time, sunset. And I was like, oh, I can't wait to go back. Like, I really can't wait to come back here.
Wow.
And like take more photos. And I'm going to do that. That's partly why I'm trying to take photography classes. So I have like an excuse to motivate myself to actually go out. Because like I said, it's a pain to, like, when you get accustomed to the inside world and you go into the outside world, it's like, whoa. Yeah. But I went out of my way to confront that pain in a productive way. And I think that's what's happening is, like, we're just sitting around all the time. These young people, they're sitting around all the time online, and they don't have a productive outlet, so they turn it in back on themselves because they don't have a physical person there. They only have a screen, and they get so enraged physically, they react so intensely in their bodies, and then all that's left is an empty void of a screen with no one really there to talk to or really respond to you, and just yourself. You're just left in a room by yourself with your body, with your, like, increased heart rate and, like, activated nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. And it's like, what else are you going to do but just hate yourself, that you're hating the thing that's experiencing all this pain. And believe me, like, dude, I experience just, like, I don't even want to brag, but, like, yeah, I experience so much pain, like, all the time. Like, I really, really, really do. But I've realized over the years, like, my body is capable of experiencing not just an intense amount of pain, but an intense amount of pleasure as well, if I actually focus on that more. So I can focus on, like, the hour a day that I weep intensely and I, my heart just burns, into ash every day. Or I can focus on the kind of phoenix rising from that ash from the rest of, like, the 23 hours that I feel, like, really, like, alive with, like, like, if you saw my body, if you saw my x-ray, it feels like it's, like, vibrating so intensely. That's why when I cry, I, like, physically shake from the power of it, of my own body. It's really a beautiful experience. Now, I wish it happened a little less frequently when I, break down.
You can't see me now, but I'm waving my hands.
Preach, funk God.
Absolutely.
That's why I spread the gospel of funk.
I just want to point out, hey, that what you're talking about there in those last few minutes is the burden of many of us, and we spoke about this in the Third Factor podcast as well. The burden of many of us who, for whatever reasons, whatever the factors are that combine to create this hyper awareness, like you were saying earlier about, you don't want to put on so many clothes in winter because it's oversensitizing you. That might sound weird to some people because it's like, no, but it's protecting you from sensation, Problem is, though, people like us, and because I'm older, I might sound like I'm a hell of a lot more resilient, and of course I am, but I very much, what I always say to Laura when we're chatting privately is we're simpatico, which is the Italian or Latin phrase for being sympathetic to each other's world, you know, because this is exactly what I'm talking about. As you were speaking there about how wonderful those moments are, that's exactly what I'm talking about. So just to focus on that one example where I climbed this mountain, I've just remembered I actually cried on the way up the mountain as well. I was an emotional wreck that day, and I'd driven. I did rent a cabin to stay over, but I'd driven 4 or 5 hours to get to this place. I woke up the next day, and my sole mission was to get to the top of this hill and do this little ritual of mine that I just made up in my mind. But having said that, when I came down, I was, it was just ecstasy. It was just, and I came back from that trip like a completely different person, you know. And yes, of course, it doesn't always last. Obviously, a week or two later, maybe you were feeling depressed again, because the actual circumstances of your life don't always completely change just because your internal perspective has shifted. But there is there's no stopping the internal shift, I believe. It's actually, I think that's when we become extremely depressed, and that's when we develop, pathologies, is when we're trying to block that process. But the crying and recovering is almost like the layering of the onion, or maybe that's not the best analogy, but you know what I mean, like the layering of the cake, let's say. To get to the point that you can put candles on and light the bloody cake, you've got to layer the cake, and I'm so conscious of being older, and I think sometimes people just assume, oh, well, he's kind of speaking as an older person, and sounds like, but I've been through so many different cycles of this, and I can promise you that the coming out of it is better every time.
Yes.
It's better every time.
Yes.
There's a bit of a fallacy that I've seen it in psychology research, that they say your peak experiences are in your adolescence. Okay? They might be speaking about very specific sensations, but I can tell you that your peak experience of life, just of being alive, of being a human being on this rock orbiting the sun, increases as you get older. And it's literally why some elderly people are so blasé about so many things, because they know that the real miracle happens every morning. It's not, it's not this some other thing that they're waiting to happen. So, just if we can summarize like what we've been speaking about today, it's this how the ideology masks all these journeys that we should be facing bravely and with conviction, and together. This is the problem, is that so much of the discourse on social media is so shallow and so fickle. It doesn't talk about this kind of stuff. I know there is a lot of motivational stuff, but I just worry that it because it's often from a sort of top-down perspective, it's often like these gurus that are telling us to be stronger and keep your shit together.
Yeah, that's us right now, the two gurus.
Well, we're giving people experiences. We're telling people this is how we got through it, and actually, neither of us are saying that figured it out.
Right.
There won't be any other challenges. But to discern the difference between the nihilism of those posts, and I know it's Twitter, we're just using that as an example, but the nihilism that you can see in those posts, as opposed to the seeking of truth and the exposure of opportunistic behavior that your letter represents, for example. There's a distinction there that I think is really worth pointing out. And normally I wouldn't want to sort of isolate people's comments on Twitter, because that's certainly when it comes to politics, that doesn't really serve much good. But in this particular context, I think it's so obvious that there's this nihilistic, and when I say consumerist mentality, I'm talking about how Foucault put it, this idea that you don't commit suicide, instead just abuse everything, abuse and use everything. I mean, he literally said, he made a comment, for example, if you can see how this relates to the surgery aspect now. He made a comment, and I'm paraphrasing, but basically that sex is so transcendental, the act of sex is so transcendental that it's worth dying for. So do you see how this idea that you can have surgeries that are life-threatening for the opportunity at some kind of transcendence is embedded in their thinking, And even though these people might not specifically know Foucault, they're influenced by that idea, by this idea of
the born again Christian substitute, basically. It's just like you said, when you climbed that mountain, right? You were almost like born again in a way. And, it's like, and you get born again every time you go through that cycle of going into the ash and rising as the phoenix and burning again. But this is like a permanent, I mean, everything is permanent. We all like age and everything, but like, I have heard a lot of people talk about how it's this, because it's again like a spiritual crisis, right? So like they're searching for the transcendence and themselves, but they're turning in on themselves and they hate themselves, and then they think that they can find transcendence in themselves by turning themselves into something that they are not, and then they try to be born again, and that's why like you hear like Exalancic talk about like trans rites, like rites, like it's like a religious rite of passage, all these different things, it's a substitute for the lack of rituals, basically. Like we don't even have to say religious, but just rituals in general, like coming of age rituals, and other just things we've seemed to have lost because we're so fascinated with the internet, and adults are so fascinated with the digital culture, and everything is so fast now that we're moving so quickly that we really have lost track of like kind of the slower, traditional, methodical route to just developing and growing and in general.
So actually that's a very good tie to what I was saying earlier, that I've got if you take the evolutionary psychology perspective, and I think a lot of psychology supports this anyway, but this idea that I think when we ask what is the function of rituals and rites of passage, okay, the function of those things, I believe, is to signal to your body, and this does tie in with that book Antifragility. He also talks about this kind of concept of how when you break a bone, it grows back stronger. Okay, so that's a very obvious example of how damage and resistance builds resilience, which empowers you to survive, to keep going. Okay, but I think there's a metaphysical layer here that by ignoring the rites and the rituals, which have been sort of embodied in our adopted in our as a human species. Okay, let's say over the last 30,000 years, let's say, it's silly things. I mean, anything from the mother giving physical birth, the baby's initial trauma of just coming into the world. It's a shock, and I believe your whole body, your cells, your very DNA it tells everything else to live, and that sparks all the other systems, the well-being systems, the health systems, the right down to the digestive systems. I mean, it's no secret that a lot of somatic complaints, bodily function and feeling complaints originate from the psyche. Okay, that's no secret, and that's not mumbo jumbo. That we all know that. But it's just funny to me that we often don't talk about how it's the rites, the rituals and the rites are a deliberate way of instigating those stages of change, those different life stage changes that are so essential. So instead what we do is we go and we find them in the outside world. We go and we create them. you know, I don't want to drag out this particular episode with more personal experiences, but and I think anyone can look back on their lives and think about the times when they walked into a situation or a relationship or a job where they knew it was going to be difficult. And, you know, there might have been a period where they were like, oh, God, I knew this was going to be hard. And why am I here? And why can't I get out? But for us to look back and say that that was a waste of time is you're already slipping towards the nihilistic way of thinking. And this is kind of my approach to counseling, is that as soon as you switch that, just slightly change the course of direction, you start adapting and adopting responses and methods that bring you to this existential crisis, which is, why do I need this body part? Why don't I have, as you were saying, these internalized processes that can make me feel transcendent?
Right.
You cannot possibly internally transcend, otherwise you never left your mother's womb. You would have just stayed there and just transcended, you know, and then died. You know, I mean, obviously I'm being really simplistic, but it's a lot of what you're saying is how, you know, and you and I spoke about this once before, and I said to you that the most overwhelming thing when I heard a lot of your story, your transitioning and then detransitioning story, the overwhelming thing that I felt after that very long conversation we had once was survival.
Mm-hmm.
It was just survival. It was like, oh my God, you survived. I wanted to like reach through the screen and give you a massive hug, because what an incredible achievement. I mean, you did.
Yeah.
It was a messy path, yes.
Yeah.
And there was some collateral damage.
Yeah.
And there's lots of things you haven't resolved. I mean, you've never said that you've resolved everything, you know.
Oh, I have not said that.
Exactly. And I'd be suspicious of anyone who said they did anyway.
Right. You know what my grandpa says is like, whenever, you know, I say anything, and, you know, I am usually pretty upbeat around him, because like it's impossible to be nihilistic around him, because the only thing he ever says if I complain about something is, you know, he just says, well, shit happens. That's life. Literally. And for me, it's like, you're not going to give me any room to talk about my troubles. And I know it's just like, you know, that's a little bit too much for me, too simplistic, but like, that's what he says. And every single day when I come down, you know, I've been up all night and he's coming up at like 7 a.m. or whatever. He says like, he looks out the window and he says, another fine day. That's what he says.
Oh,
and
wow.
Every night my aunt calls him at 9:30 and she says, you know, how was the day today? And he's like, just peachy, another fine day. It's going, you know, just peachy. That's what he always says. It's another fine day, you know.
Are you sure you're related?
Well, my dad's in between there, so we could dive into that another time. But I mean, my grandpa, I'm not going to get into it, but he did have like a cancerous tumor taken out of his brain a few years ago, and the doctors say it's like a miracle that he's even alive. And he, you know, he's just like literally the most chill person that I've ever met. It's like, dude, how are you even functioning? You don't go on Twitter?
Yeah.
You don't go on Twitter? He doesn't even have, he doesn't have a phone. He doesn't even, but he has a dog and he loves that dog and he feeds the birds and he has like 15 turkeys that come like every day. Wow. Yeah, he's really got the birds. But, you know, so it's just like, as you said, you know, older people, you know, and I don't know. It's just a very beautiful thing. And so I've been trying to just have more gratitude and appreciation for it, I guess.
The one wonderful thing about the internet, just to bring it all the way full circle, is you can do these kinds of things, you know, and you and I never met in person, but we're connecting across thousands of miles and, you know, totally different cultures. And, you know, we were chatting on Thanksgiving. Laura and I had a bit of a Thanksgiving of our own, which was such fun. But we were just chatting about how just being appreciative of things that we do have, you know, rather than constantly focusing on the things we don't have, and to tie up what I'm been saying and what I was kind of hoping we could cover, and we did it so well in this episode, is just this idea of recognizing how ideology draws you towards nihilism, and it switches off all the flourishing signals that your body is looking for. Whereas the opposite of adopting a pursuit, appreciating your environment, appreciating the even if it's one person around you, all of a sudden switches on these appreciation mechanisms, and that's how you start taking the steps towards those moments of transcendence that you'll have in your life. And they'll only be moments, but wow, when they happen, they're just transcendental.
Right. And when they happen and you become more mindful of them, you'll notice that they're happening more frequently, more and more.
Exactly.
Yeah. And for longer periods of time. And I've also noticed that I'm in the nihilistic phase a much shorter amount of time than I used to be.
Okay, well, let's leave it at that. I think that's a beautiful message. As usual, thanks for listening. This is episode 2 of TransPsyche. It's Laura and Vincent, and we're going to put some links in the notes so that you can link to what we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm. And remember, like and subscribe, and be careful what you post on Twitter, my friends.
Thank you for listening to TransPsyche. If you want to add your thoughts on these topics, let's discuss them in the public forum on Twitter at TransPsychePod. That's TransPsychepod.
We need your help bringing these issues to a larger audience. You can contribute to the discussion by clicking the like button on your favorite audio platform, YouTube, and subscribing to the show so you can keep up with the conversation.
You can connect with both Laura and Vincent on Twitter, or email the show at transpsychepodcast@gmail.com. We appreciate hearing from you.
We're also on Patreon. You can become a supporter at transpsychepodcast@patreon.com. If you know someone who might benefit from these ideas, please share the show with your friends and family on social media.
Please remember this podcast is for discussion purposes only and is not intended as mental health advice or counseling.